Hello, in this video I'm going to give you your feedback based on the chapter discussion around the early years of the American Republic leading to the formation of the Constitution. The first question was, what problems did the United States face after independence? Well, there were many, and I'm not obviously going to list all of them, but the main ones were there's lack of a strong central government. In particular, the central government could not raise taxation. This also was related to the problem of the army. Many soldiers were unpaid following the War of Independence. This led to a lot of dissatisfaction with Congress. And if Congress couldn't raise funds to pay for those soldiers, that was going to be a problem. The Nuber Conspiracy was an attempt to persuade Washington to seize power. This happened and happens often in revolutions where the military ends up with a lot of authority after a successful revolution or war of independence, and the military just seizes power. The same thing happened in England in the 17th century under Cromwell, and later in the 18th century would happen under Napoleon Bonaparte in France. Fortunately, Washington refused to go along with this. He placed his duty to the American Republic before his personal ambition. Then there was Shays's Rebellion in Massachusetts. This reflected the problems of poor farmers, poor agriculturalists. They attacked the law courts because that's where people were being brought in to force them to pay up unpaid debts. So the indebted small farmers were angry and frustrated, reflected in actions such as Shays's Rebellion. And then there's the economic problem of paper money. In order to deal with economic crisis and to deal with the need to pay the government's debts, money was literally just printed. If you have paper money without people having confidence that it's based on anything solid like gold or precious metals or a strong economy or a strong bank, it just leads to inflation, which just made the situation worse economically. The second question was, what were the most divisive issues that the Constitutional Convention faced, and how were they resolved? Well, one issue was the question of big versus small states. Should the states be represented with an equal say for each one, or should they be represented in a way that reflected their population? The small states feared they would just be outvoted by the big states, whereas the big states felt that as they would contribute the most in terms of taxation, they should have more of a say. This was resolved by setting up a Senate which represented the states alongside a House of Representatives that elected the states in proportion to their population. This is still the case today, where every state, whether it is California with over 30 million or Wyoming with 500,000, has 2 senators. Another issue was whether to go with a centralized government or a far looser affiliation of individual states. Again, this tended to overlap with the question of small versus large states, with the smaller states fearing that a strong central government would just override their concerns. Well, this was dealt with by separation of powers, ensuring that no one branch of government had too much power, and by balancing between the centralized government and state governments. To this day, states can still make their own laws, still have a lot of independence from the federal government. And the president would be indirectly elected. So there would be one strong executive, but he would be indirectly elected through the electoral college. This is also a way of ensuring that states were represented rather than simply individuals, addressing the question of the fears for small states. Then the issue of slavery was divisive. This was resolved, at least for the time being, although clearly not in the long run, as we'll see with the Civil War, by firstly kicking the can down the road in terms of when slavery would be abolished. Slavery itself was not going to be abolished, but the slave trade was not to be abolished until 20 years after the Constitutional Convention. And slaves were counted as 3/5 of a person when it came to representing the states in the House of Representatives. The slave states wanted their representation to reflect their population, but the non-slave owning states felt that it was unfair that people who had no rights whatsoever should be counted towards the number of people represented in the House of Representatives. So the 3/5 compromise was agreed upon. And I'm going to end there because I don't want to make the video too long, so I'll come back in a separate video to answer the third question.